Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, where you'll hear highly accomplished and fascinating guests talk about the challenges they've overcome and the winning mindsets that have led them to great success. And now your host, Dr. Bob.
Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. You know, when a guest is going to speak to an audience, the moderator often says something like, "Our guest today doesn't need an introduction." And then the moderator proceeds to give a lengthy introduction of the guest. Well, our guest today is well known to many of you, but not to all of you. So for those of you who don't know who Larry Elder is, I'm going to give you a brief introduction. Larry is an author and attorney, and for over 20 years has been the host of the Larry Elder radio talk show. He is an articulate spokesman for conservative values and is an ardent supporter of the U.S. Constitution and traditional family values. He loves California, or at least he loves the California that used to be. And because he wants California to return to the preeminence that it once had, he recently became a candidate for governor of the state of California. And currently, he is leading all of the other candidates by a significant margin. So if on Tuesday, September 14th, if more people vote yes to recall Gavin Newsom than vote no, Larry Elder will be the next governor of the state of California. Larry, I want to welcome you to the show. And, you know, I did some preparation prior to this, of course, on your background.
Yeah, that helps.
I've been reading about you. And I came across a recent article in the LA Times. It was a large article, just a week ago, August 20th. The article states, and I quote, "You are the black face of white supremacy." And after a bit more reading, I found a quote from Melina Abdullah, who's co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And she said, and I quote this as well, "He is a danger, a clear and present danger. This is a black man, but everything that he's pushing, everything that he stands for is advancing white supremacy." So, Larry, is it true that you are a white supremacist hiding in a black man's body?
Well, Dr. Bob, thank you for having me on your broadcast. It's an honor to be here, so I really do appreciate it. It's ludicrous, and the reason they're saying that is because I threaten the narrative. The narrative is that America is systemically racist, that white people are oppressing black people, and the plight of black America has to do with systemic racism in America. My father came to California in 1945. Right after the war. My father was a 8th grade dropout when he came here. Didn't have any money. He cleaned toilets, full-time job at a place called Nabisco Brand Bread. Took a second full-time job at a company called Barbara Ann Bread, also cleaning toilets. Went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED because he dropped out of school in the 8th grade, and cooked for a family on the weekend to make additional money. With that income, my father was still able to have a stay-at-home wife, my mother, who stayed at home until the youngest of us was in middle school. With that income, my dad managed to save his nickels and dimes and buy a house in South Central Los Angeles. The good news is it's still in the family. The bad news is for people who are trying to duplicate my father's route as an 8th grade dropout, that house is now worth $600,000. The point is my father worked his butt off, believed in America, did not believe in whining. If anybody had a right to whine about America, it was my dad. He was kicked out of the house when he was 13 years old by his irresponsible mother. Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South at the beginning of the Great Depression. Yet my father always told my brothers and me, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but he said you always are 100% in control of the effort. And before you whine and moan about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror and look at it and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my father said this, Dr. Bob, no matter how good you are, how hard you work, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen to you. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. Speaking of my mom was from Athens, Georgia, also Jim Crow South. She was 9 years younger than my dad, grew up on a farm. And my mother always told my brothers and me, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. Quick story about my mother. When I was in high school, we read a poem in class. It was an African American studies poem, studies class. And by the way, I called it an African American studies class because that was the title. It's a term I never use, African American. I'm an American who's black. I think it's a condescending term. There's a wonderful video of Smokey Robinson, the former Motown Act guy, who did I think about a 5 or 10 minute rant on how much he despises the term African American. He says, I'm an American who's black. I'm an American who's black. So I only say it was an African American studies course because that was the title of it.
Got it.
There was a poem by a poet named County Cullen, and it goes like this, Dr. Bob. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, the teacher was angry, black female teacher. The class was angry. Most of the class was black. I was angry. And the teacher said things like, he'll always think of himself as a second-class citizen. He'll always think of himself, he'll always be permanently stained. His psyche will be permanently stained as an inferior person. He'll never be fully integrated into the American system. As I was walking home, I knew my mother, who always said nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission, would have a different take. I didn't know what it would be. So I walk in the kitchen. My mom was stirring a big pot of greens and frying fried chicken wings, which is my favorite. We just had a delightful meal that your wife prepared. It wasn't fried chicken wings, but that's my favorite. And she was stirring a big pot of greens, as I said, and frying fried chicken wings. I said, Mom, we read a poem in class today. I want to get your reaction to it. And she said, sure, what is it? I said, it goes like this. I read it to her. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mom took the spoon out of the pot, hit it on the side of the pot, and said, Larry, what a darn shame he allowed something like that to spoil his vacation. How many wings do you want? Mm-hmm. And the point behind the story is my mother and father, despite the fact that they grew up in deep Jim Crow South, great segregation, always told us the sky is open now. The door is wide open. This is well before Obama ever got elected president, let alone re-elected president. And my parents always told us, if you work hard and invest in yourself, you'll be just fine in America. It's my long way of saying the reason people call me these names is because my whole life, my whole attitude, my whole narrative refutes their narrative, which is that America is systemically racist.
Right. And you can't make
black
it.
Black people are eternally oppressed. You can't make it. Right. White people are dominating you. It's crap, absolute crap. And that's why they hate my guts, because this whole stuff about critical racism, race theory, and I've also said this, since I've been running, I've been interviewed by black press, by Hispanic press. The black reporters routinely ask me, why is it that I don't believe that America is systemically racist? And I always say this, Dr. Bob, pull out your magic wand, wave it over America. Remove every smidgen of racism from the hearts of white people. So now everybody white thinks like Mother Teresa. Do we still have the phenomenon that 70% of black children enter the world without a father married to the mother? And forget about Elder. Barack Obama once said, a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to drop out of school and commit crime, 5 times more likely to drop out of school and commit crime, 9 times more likely to fail to finish high school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Now the question is, how have we gone from 25% of black kids being born outside of wedlock to 70% today? Do we still have the phenomenon where the number one cause of preventable death for young white men is accidents, like car accidents or drownings, whereas the number one cause of preventable death for young black men is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black man? Do we still have the phenomenon where a young black man is 8 times more likely to be murdered compared to a young white man? If the answer to that series of questions is yes, then I submit to you that systemic racism is not the problem, and critical race theory and reparation are not the answer. And they don't have a retort to that. They don't have a response to it. It's crap. And I blame a lot of this on Barack Obama. Barack Obama, of course, became the first black president. He had a higher percentage of the white vote than John Kerry did 4 years earlier. And I saw Barack Obama in 2007 when he was running for the nomination. And he was gaining on Hillary. He wasn't a front runner yet, but he was on 60 Minutes. And Steve Croft, the correspondent who's still there, said, Senator Obama, if you don't win, will it be because of racism? And I'm at home by myself, Dr. Bob, and I said, let me see how this man answers this question. And Barack Obama said, no. If I don't win, it will be because I failed to articulate a vision that the American people can embrace. I said to myself, wow. Fast forward, the man becomes elected president. You might remember this. Shortly after he got elected, his good friend, who was a Harvard tenured professor named Henry Louis Gates, he teaches African American studies at Harvard, was briefly arrested in Cambridge.
I remember the story.
He came home from vacation, forgot his door key. So he and a cab driver, a limo driver, broke into his house. A neighbor saw this, called 911. Don't you want your neighbors to see something like that and call 911?
Good idea.
She didn't know it was him. Cop shows up, white cop, very politely, doesn't know that this man inside the house belongs to the house. Mm-hmm. So he asked Skip Gates to come out and show ID. And Gates said, I'll come out if your mama tells me. So the cop arrested him briefly, handcuffed him briefly. It became this big thing.
I remember.
And Barack Obama held a press conference and said, the Cambridge police acted stupidly. No, they did not. They did their freaking job. Right. What Obama should have said is the following. Last night I had a talk with my good friend Skip Gates. I said, Skip, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're a role model. You're a Harvard tenured professor, for crying out loud. Cop's doing his job. Your neighbor is monitoring what's going on in your neighborhood. Don't you want all neighbors to do that? And
should
instead of being grateful,
ID, right? And
instead of being polite to the cop, you play the race card. You've made things worse, Skip. And I told my friend Skip Gates this last night. That's what he should have said. And every single time Obama had an opportunity to say something like what I said, he picked up the race card and played it. If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, referring to George Zimmerman killing him. Right. What does that mean? Yeah. George Zimmerman was found not guilty. And one of it was an all-white jury, but there was a black alternate. And the black alternate was asked, how would you have ruled? And the black alternate said, I would have ruled the same way, not guilty. And the jurors said race never was a factor. Ferguson, Michael Brown, did not have his hands up, did not say don't shoot. His friend lied. The cop was completely exonerated. Obama speaking before the United Nations and said, we have our own problems in America. There's a place called Ferguson.
Oh, really?
Al Sharpton, the man who made his bones falsely accusing a white man of raping Tawana Brawley. That's how he got famous. Obama invited him into the White House over 70 or 80 times, Dr. Bob. Every single time Obama had a chance to stop this BS, he made it worse. I'll tell you why. Not because he doesn't know what I know. He's not stupid. He knows he got a higher percentage of the white vote than John Kerry did, because he knows in order for Democrats to remain powerful, they have to convince 13% of the electorate, black people, that they're being burdened by the white man. And we Democrats wear the white hat, and those guys over there, Republicans, wear the black hat. One more thing, and I'll shut up because I know you have other questions. When Obama announced for the candidacy, he was running against Hillary for the nomination on the Democratic side. And on the Republican side, Mitt Romney was running against John McCain. Gallup asked Americans, what percentage of you would never vote for a black man for president? 5% said no. 5%. How many of you would never vote for a female? 11% said no. How many of you would never vote for a Mormon, referring to Mitt Romney? 24%. How many of you would never vote for somebody who would be as old as John McCain? At the time, he would have been 72 years old had he won the presidency. How many of you would never vote for somebody that old? 42%. Obama's threshold was lower than these three white politicians. Knock it off. I said I was going to shut up. I want to say one more thing. 1997. By the way, I haven't been on CNN in years. They used to have me on regularly. And the last time I was on, I said this to Don Lemon. We were talking about how much racism there is in America. I said, don't you remember the study that you guys did? CNN and Time Magazine teamed up together. Did a study, extensive study. It was on the front page of Time Magazine about the racial attitudes of white teenagers and black teenagers. And both of them were asked, is racism a major problem in America? And not too surprisingly, both of them said yes. But then Time and CNN did the following, Dr. Bob. They asked the black teenagers, is racism a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in your own daily life? 89% of black students said racism was a small problem or no problem in my own daily life. 1997, 24 years ago. In fact, more black teens than white teens said, and this is verbatim, more black teens than white teens said, quote, failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism, end of quote. 1997, 24 years ago, before Obama got elected, before Obama got reelected. It's nonsense. Racism has never been a less significant factor in American life than today. Yet all these race hustlers, systemic racism, critical race theory, reparations, it's horse bleep, and it's designed to make black people think that they're oppressed so that 13% of black people pull that lever for the social justice warrior party, which is the Democratic Party. They're being manipulated.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the quality of education in urban schools is abysmal. Meanwhile, you've got 70% of black children entering the world without a father, and we're not having a discussion about whether or not the welfare state is incentivizing women to marry the government and is incentivizing men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. They're being misled. And I upset that whole narrative. That's why these people call me the black face of white supremacy.
Larry, as governor of California, you're going to face many problems that exist today in California. Let's talk about crime. One thing I clearly don't understand is that the law was recently changed to make a theft of $950 or less, anything $950 or less, right, a misdemeanor, right, which means basically the police aren't going to investigate it. Or if they did and brought it to the Attorney General of California or any Attorney General in any city, that they would probably say, we're not going to prosecute it. Mm-hmm. How does that make sense to make it not a crime, essentially, not a felony, to go into a store and steal?
It doesn't make any sense. But to the voters' defense, and voters voted for this, the intent was understandable, that people who steal are stealing primarily to support their meth habit or their heroin habit, and they should be in rehab. What it did, however, is remove the stick. I talked to Sheriff Alex Villanueva of the LA County Sheriff's Department about this very thing. He said what Proposition 47 did is to tell people, we can no longer either make you dry up in jail or you're going to dry up in rehab, but dry up you will. Now they can steal with impunity because we can't send them to jail. And what's happening is not just $950 a day, but $950 a store.
Per incident.
A store.
Yeah.
You can do it all day long. Make a living off of it. And as a result, between 15 and 20 Walgreens have closed up in San Francisco because they can't make any money. And the others have had their hours restricted, inconveniencing customers and causing people, often people of color, to lose their jobs.
Often
it's
people in the poorer
neighborhoods. It needs to be repealed. Yes.
Don't have access now to a pharmacy or retail stores.
Right.
They'll have to go elsewhere.
It needs to be repealed.
Needs to be.
And the other thing is that under the coronavirus, Gavin Newsom has overseen the release of 20,000 felons, many of whom are violent offenders. And according to statistics, the majority of them are going to reoffend. Just the other day, Barbara Boxer had her cell phone taken. She was mugged, the former senator of California, in Oakland. And just a few days earlier, the Oakland police chief complained about money being diverted from his department. A few months earlier, Gavin Newsom was attacked by a mentally ill homeless person, and the only reason Gavin Newsom was safe is because he had a security detail. How many people living in the inner city have security detail? The very people that the left claims that they care about are the ones being hurt by the rise of crime. The other reason for this is because of this defund the police movement. And the defund the police movement has its origin in this narrative that the police are engaging in systemic racism, that they're using deadly force against blacks just because they're black. It's a lie. There's an article in the Washington Post, I always like to use left-wing sources whenever I can, dated April 27, 2016. Research going back over decades, showing the police, if anything, are more hesitant, more reluctant to use deadly force on a black suspect than a white suspect. Probably because of fear of being accused of systemic racism. The police kill more unarmed white people every year than unarmed black people. It has two effects. It causes cops to pull back. It's called the Ferguson effect. Now they're calling it the George Floyd effect. Bad guys know it, crime goes up. When you reduce the possibility of a bad guy being caught, being captured, being incarcerated, crime goes up. That's not rocket science. The other effect, though, it has on this. If you're a young black man, particularly a young black man who didn't grow up without a father, who didn't have a father like I did, who taught me whenever you're pulled over, Larry, make sure your left hand is at 10 o'clock, make sure your right hand is at 2 o'clock. Say yes, sir, say no, sir. Say yes, ma'am, say no, ma'am. Make sure your paperwork is in order. And if you feel you've been mistreated, get a badge number and deal with it while you're alive. If you're a young black man and that has not been taught to you, and you hear from Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and CNN and Barack Obama that cops are out to get you, they're not there to protect and serve. They're out to get you. Why should you cooperate? Why should you comply? Virtually every one of these high-profile killings and deaths would have been avoided. If Michael Brown had complied, he'd be alive. If Freddie Gray had complied, he'd be alive. If Aaron Gardner, the one that was selling Lucy's in New York, who was suffocated, if he had complied, he'd be alive. If Jacob Blake, the one who was shot in the back and is now paralyzed, had complied, he would not be in a wheelchair.
If George Floyd got into the police car, that they were three cops.
Right.
I saw the videos. 3 policemen were trying to get him into the back seat of a police car. They weren't able to.
They weren't able to.
If he complied, he probably would be alive.
We wouldn't have even had this thing. That's not to exonerate what Derek Chauvin did, but if he complied, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And you're teaching young black men not to comply. Therefore, a garden variety stop is now escalated into DEFCON 1, and you've done that.
Let's talk more about the regulations in California. As you know, the schools, the primary schools, K through 12, have been closed for about a year. I don't know if they're open now. But private schools were open all that time. And it seems that the teachers, the Public School Teachers Union, said it's too dangerous. So I guess that teachers are only affected by COVID if they're in a public school union.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It's unbelievable.
Amazing how that virus discriminates like that. Yeah. You can tell whether you're a public school teacher or a private school teacher.
Well, it's the same thing in restaurants. You know, you had to, I don't know how it is today, but you had to go into the restaurant with a mask. But once you sit down, you can take the mask off. And I think it has an altitude thing.
Yeah, I think it is.
Above 4 feet, that's where COVID
I think what it is. It's all about the chair.
It's about the chair.
And speaking about education, the route from poverty to the middle class is to at least get a high school education, presumably one where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. You look at the urban high schools, and many of them have a 50% dropout rate. And even those where the kids do graduate and they go on to a junior college or a 4-year college, they end up taking remedial math and remedial English because they didn't get it in high school. 80% of the kids in government schools, I call them government schools, not public schools, government schools are black and brown. I only mention that because the left prides itself on caring about black and brown students. 75% of black boys in California pre-COVID could not read at state levels of proficiency, and those levels are low. Half of third graders cannot read at state levels of proficiency. I went to a high school called Crenshaw High School. If you saw the movie Boys in the Hood, that's my high school. 2% of kids are math proficient. The polls show black and brown parents want the ability to take their kid out of a school like that, put them in a charter school or religious school or private school or even homeschool. They want the money to follow the child rather than the other way around. The number one obstacle, teachers union. And they're the number one funder of my opponent, Gavin Newsom. So these black parents and brown parents getting the worst teachers, the worst principals, the worst administrators. They're not putting them in the West Side. They're not putting them in the Valley. They're putting them in South Central. Yet they pull that lever year after year after year for the Democratic Party. That is the number one obstacle for choice.
It's their enemy.
It's
their enemy.
ridiculous.
I recall when California public schools were first, they were in the top 10 in the nation.
Easily.
And now they're 40th in the nation.
And some have them even lower than that. If you look at the reading, the math scores, sometimes they're even lower. And Dr. Bob, what I find particularly offensive is a study that was done by an organization called the Fordham Institute several years ago. They looked at where public school teachers sent their own school-age kids. Nationwide, 10% of families have their kids in private school. 6% of black families do. 44% of Philadelphia public school teachers with school-age kids have their own kids in private school.
They know that they can't, that 40% of the teachers, I'm just repeating this, understand that they're not going to get a good education in public school. They send them to private school.
39% of Chicago public school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school. In L.A., where I am, the district, a public school teacher with a school-age kid is twice as likely to put his or her kid in private school compared to a family that does not have a public school teacher in it. That's the equivalent, I say, of opening up a restaurant, putting out a sign outside and saying, "Come on in, eat the food. I sure won't."
Right.
It's
These
insulting.
are the teachers in the public schools
the ones,
are not
the ones
sending
who know
their own
the school
kids
the best
to public school.
Don't send their own kids there. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
And I want to break that. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to be their champion. And when I've made this argument on the campaign trail, I'm not saying all of a sudden the people I tell this to become Reagan Republicans, but I can tell their eyes are opening. The wheels are spinning. And this stranglehold that the left has on black and brown voters is going to be broken. And the primary reason is because of the deteriorating quality of public education.
I think Trump said it best. He says, vote for me. He was talking to people in the inner cities. We're talking about Detroit, Chicago, L.A., the minority communities who are living with lousy schools, lousy services, high crime rate. And Trump said, and it's common sense, vote for me. What do you got to lose? In these cities, the Democrats have been in control for many, 50 years or more.
Right. Let me give you some numbers, Dr. Bob. 4, 6, 8, 12. This is why the left has doubled down on stuff like critical race theory. Barack Obama runs for president in 2008. First black president, obviously the black community embraced him, adored him. Only 4% of blacks voted for Republican president. Barack Obama presided over the worst recovery since 1949. By the end of his term, black poverty had increased, not decreased, had increased. Between 2010 and 2013, black people lost 1/3 of their net worth. Do I blame Obama for that? Yes, I do. I'll tell you why. Because when Obama was a private lawyer, he sued Citigroup, claiming that a whole bunch of plaintiffs were denied loans for mortgages just because they were black. So Citicorp said, okay, gave them 28 plaintiffs their mortgages. Fast forward, virtually every single one of them either went bankrupt, lost a mortgage, couldn't keep up because they didn't follow the normal criteria. 5 years of working, 20% down payment, that kind of thing.
Nothing to do with color. It has to do with the financial history.
So a whole bunch of people got homes who never should have gotten them. They would have been perfectly better off renting. Along comes the recession. Recessions come. You can't predict when they're going to come, when they're going to stop. And a whole bunch of people who had homes who never should have had them lost everything. So I blame Obama for that. But the point is, when he ran for re-election, 6% of blacks voted for the Republican Party.
Double what it was.
Not double, not quite double. 8% would have been double, but 50% more. Donald Trump ran and used the slogan you just now mentioned. What do you have to lose?
What do you?
8% voted for him in 2016. Then Trump runs for re-election. Delivered the best economy ever for black people, ever. Pardoned Alice Johnson, who had been convicted of a long nonviolent drug offense, commuted her sentence rather, pardoned Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, who was convicted of violating the Mann Act, which was passed to prevent a woman from being transported across state lines for illicit purposes, i.e. he had white girlfriends. He was convicted of that. There was been a 15-year-long effort to get him pardoned, led by Ken Burns, a left-wing documentarian, and Sylvester Stallone of Rocky fame. Obama didn't pardon him. George W. Bush didn't pardon him. Trump did. Trump also put historically black colleges on permanent footing for the next 10 years. Nobody had ever done that before. He expanded opportunity zones in the inner city, lowering taxes and regulations to spur businesses in the inner city. He supported choice in education, which black parents and brown parents want. He also passed the Music Modernization Act to allow black performers and others to get money from digital online streaming, an effort that Obama didn't even do. You add all these things up, black people the lot of black people dramatically improved under Donald Trump. He got 12% of the black vote in 2020. That's a 50% increase from 2016.
Right.
It's going in the wrong direction for these guys.
Yeah.
So income critical race theory, income reparations, they're doubling down on telling you that you're a victim because they're scared to death. You get that black vote for the Republican Party around 20%, they're done. At the national level, completely done.
Democrats will be done.
The Democrats are done.
Yeah.
They're done, and they know it.
Well, they may not be done if they cheat. And the difference from what I can see between conservatives and leftists is conservatives obey the rules, we play by the rules, and we obey the law. Leftists don't. And this is a very serious issue in our society. Conservatives, by their very nature, want to take care of themselves, their family, right, their church, their community. Leave me alone. Let me do my thing, taking care of my people. Right. Leftists don't view the world that way.
No, they don't.
They view the world as, I know what's best for you, and I'm going to control you. Mm-hmm. And my fear is, this is why conservatives are starting to lose elections. It's not just because of fraud. It's because we're going to play by the rules and other people aren't. And we aren't activists. We don't go to the streets as the leftists do, as Antifa does, as BLM does, and threatens the administration of any city or town or country that we're going to burn you down unless you do what we want. Right. Conservatives will never do that. Right. And I'm worried that conservatives are too passive.
There's another reason why this happens. The left thinks of you and me as bad people, evil. Yeah. Therefore, they can justify anything. If you call Donald Trump Hitler, as they did over and over and over again, 83% of them consider Donald Trump to be racist. We think they're wrong, ill-informed, ignorant, devoid of the facts, but not evil. Mm-hmm. We just disagree with them. Mm-hmm. They don't just disagree with us. They think we're fundamentally rotten to the core. Mm-hmm. And you can justify almost any damn thing if you feel that way. The other thing is this. You were talking about cheating and how they play. Donald Trump, of course, is being raked over the coals for the quote-unquote big lie about the 2020 election. There were all sorts of shenanigans. Michigan allowed virtually anybody to get a ballot, whether they requested it or not, against their law. Michigan expanded their deadlines. Even Alan Dershowitz and Jonathan Turley, two left-wing professors who never voted for Donald Trump, said that what Michigan did was illegal and felt that the U.S. Supreme Court should have taken up the Michigan case and predicted that when they did, Donald Trump would win it. Well, the Supreme Court didn't. Wisconsin, there were all sorts of shenanigans, including ballots that were dropped off around the city, and Donald Trump sued. It went all the way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They ruled 4-3 not to take it up on the merits, but the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court filed a dissent and said, this is outrageous, we should have taken this up on the merits. The Hunter Biden story that New York Post put out that showed that Joe Biden knew all about what Hunter Biden was doing based on the laptop story. That story was spiked by Twitter. New York Post put it out. They blocked the New York Post's own Twitter account. They couldn't even retweet it on Twitter. And there was a study that found enough Biden voters say had they known about that story, they would not have voted for him to make it clear that Donald Trump won the election. Finally, Hillary gave this kind of advice to Joe Biden. She said, if it's a close election, do not concede under any circumstances. It was a close election. Based upon Steve Kornacki, one of the political analysts on MSNBC, he said this election was 30,000 votes in 3 states. That's close. Now, 2016. I was asked this while I was running for governor. Larry, do you think that that Joe Biden won the 2020 election fair and square? I said, do you believe that Donald Trump won the 2016 election fair? And the person said, well, yes. I said, Hillary doesn't. Mm-hmm. Hillary referred to this man as having stolen, her word, not mine, Dr. Bob, virtually every single day of the 4 years of his presidency. She also called him illegitimate, her word, not mine. Now, there were 2 takeaways from the Senate intelligence report about the 2016 election. The major takeaway was this. One of them was this. Despite their efforts, the Russians failed to change a single vote tally. They tried, but they failed to change a single vote tally. Do you know that 2/3 of Democrats believe the Russians changed vote tallies?
Despite 4 years of investigations.
Right. And Jay Johnson, the Homeland Security Secretary, testified under oath that while the Russians tried, no evidence they changed a single vote tally. They don't care. 2/3 of Democrats still believe the Russians changed vote tallies to elect Donald Trump. The second major finding is this. Despite what they did, basically what the Russians did was buy a bunch of Facebook ads, about 5,000. Some of them were anti-Trump. Some of them were pro-Trump. Some of them were anti-Hillary. Some of them were pro-Hillary. Some of them were anti-Black Lives Matter. Some of them were pro-Black Lives Matter. The idea was just to stir up stuff. But they could not come away with a conclusion one way or the other whether or not the Russian interference changed the outcome of the election. Gallup poll, 78% of Democrats believe the Russians, quote, changed the outcome of the election, end of quote. Hillary's platforms have never been shut down, even though she's been pushing the quote unquote big lie about the 2016 election. Now, when I raise this, people on the left say three things to me. Well, Larry, first of all, here's why the analogy doesn't work. Hillary conceded the election, Donald Trump did not. Au contraire. Hillary never used the C word, concede. She did say that Donald Trump won the election, and Donald Trump never used the C word. But he did say Hillary won the election. Not right away. It waited a while, but he said it. The second pushback is, well, Larry, Hillary never filed a lawsuit to overturn the election. Donald Trump did. Au contraire. Hillary joined the lawsuit that Jill Stein filed to overturn the election in Wisconsin. And furthermore, Hillary's team filed a separate motion to have the recount conducted by hand. The third thing I'm told is, well, Hillary's supporters did not storm the Capitol on January 6th. That's because Hillary wasn't president on January 6th. But the implication seems to be Hillary supporters, if the shoe were on the other foot, would have been very quiet and would have accepted the results without doing anything. When Trump won the election in November 2016, there were 3 days of protests in the streets, including violent protests, including people arrested who were Hillary supporters. When January, the third week of January, when Donald Trump was inaugurated, 200 people were arrested. I've been watching presidents get inaugurated since I was a kid. I don't recall any time anybody got arrested. 200 people were arrested who were Hillary protesters. 400 people were arrested on January 6th. 200 were arrested third week of January. So my point is, Hillary supporters, if the shoe had been on the other foot, would not have gone quietly into that good night. So it's a double standard. Nobody accuses Hillary of pushing the big lie. I've never heard anybody say anything about that. She said it over and over and over again. Twitter platform still there. Facebook platform still there. Instagram platform still there. But Donald Trump cut out because of the so-called big lie. It's a double standard, and I find it offensive.
It's not only a double standard in Democrat versus Republican, but I understand the Taliban have a Twitter account.
So does Louis Farrakhan. Right there.
Right. Virulent anti-Semite, right?
Called Judaism a gutter religion, right. Called Adolf Hitler a great man. I'm not anti-Semite, I'm anti-termite. Really?
Yeah. And he has a Twitter account.
Al Sharpton.
And Donald Trump.
Al Sharpton, Crown Heights, 1991. If the Jews want to put their yarmulkes on their hat and come over to my house and get it on, let them get it on. Ferguson. In the streets of Ferguson, no justice, no peace, before one word of testimony was taken, and of course the officer completely exonerated. Do you know that Al Sharpton is on a surveillance tape discussing selling cocaine to an undercover FBI agent? Google it. 1985, HBO did a thing on it, and Al Sharpton sitting up there with a cigar and a cowboy hat. Yeah, I can sell all that stuff. What so-called Democrat kingmaker is on tape offering to sell cocaine to an FBI undercover agent?
We don't know about that. Most people don't know about that.
And he became an FBI snitch because they had him. Yeah. They made him turn us to a snitch. And this man was $5 million light in taxes while voting for the party to increase taxes.
He hasn't paid his own.
Became prominent by falsely accusing a white man named Stephen Pagonis of raping Tawana Brawley. Never apologized to that for this day. I could go on and on about what this man has done. He's got a TV show on MSNBC. And if you Google Al Sharpton and Democrat kingmaker, stand back. Kamala Harris tried to get his support when she ran for president in 2020. Beto O'Rourke, Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren. And newspaper article after newspaper article referred to him as a Democrat kingmaker. Mm-hmm. He is a black David Duke, and he is Democrat kingmaker, but I'm an Uncle Tom, and I'm the black face of white supremacy? Scotty, beam me up. It's nuts.
Change the topic a bit. Let's talk about homelessness and
let's talk about something lighter, like homelessness.
Yeah, homelessness.
Thanks, Dr. Bob.
We rate first in the nation on the number of people who are homeless in California. Mm-hmm. And it ruins the quality. It's dangerous for the homeless people.
It is.
They live in tents and on the streets, unclean situations. Crime is rampant there, from what I understand. The police don't police it. So it's dangerous to them, and it lowers the quality of life to everyone in the city.
Right.
You can't walk in certain parts of San Francisco or even San Diego.
It's a health issue as well.
It's a health
Hepatitis
issue.
is up.
Right.
Other diseases are up. Yes.
So while during the COVID shutdowns, people in San Diego were being arrested, Larry, for going to the beach, the homeless people were doing whatever they want, free of any threat of police action. And so what can we do? What is going to happen? My understanding is, and I recall as a young boy, every city had something called a state hospital. And a state hospital, everybody knew what that was. It's where you put mental patients, mm-hmm. people who are indigent or mental, primarily for their own protection.
Right.
And they were cared for, they were fed, and kept off the streets. Mm-hmm. But in the 60s, the left said this is a bad policy. We have to integrate these people into the community. It's better for them. And all the state hospitals, as far as I know, were closed. Mm-hmm. So these people who are cared for are now on the street, damaging to themselves and damaging the quality of life to everyone, mm-hmm. in just about every major city.
Right.
What can we do? What will you do, Larry, as governor?
When I'm governor, I'm not quite sure what percentage of the homeless fits your description. My suspicion is around 10%, maybe 20%, are truly schizophrenic. That means of danger to themselves or to others. They literally need to be physically removed from the streets for their own protection and for the protection of the homeless population, and they need to be put in these kinds of institutions that you just now mentioned. The rest of them are mentally ill, category less than schizophrenic, and or addicted to drugs or alcoholics. They need to be treated. It's been proven government doesn't know how to do that. Churches know how to do it. Synagogues know how to do it. Mosques know how to do it. Let them adopt a street, adopt a block, adopt a neighborhood. And at that point, you have to put them in affordable housing. We don't have affordable housing in California because of laws like CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that's allowed virtually anybody to stop any construction for any reason for an indefinite period of time. When I become governor, I'm going to declare a public crisis in housing so that these laws would be suspended so that we could unleash the private sector to build low-cost housing. Mm-hmm. But until you deal with the underlying problem of why people are on the streets in the first place, just building homes doesn't do anything. And what Gavin Newsom and the Democrats in Sacramento have done is to have what I call a housing-first policy. Houses are built, often far more expensive than would be the case if the private sector built them, without dealing with the underlying reason why people are there in the first place. Mm-hmm. So you can't make them go, you can't make them stay, and what you're doing is incentivizing people from cold weather states to come here.
Exactly
come here,
right.
They'll be treated with compassion and humanity, which everybody deserves. Mm-hmm. They'll get free needles, they'll get free food, and you even get a free house. Mm-hmm. And so cops tell me a number of the people who are homeless aren't even from California. We've incentivized homeless people from other states to come here.
Yes. I'll tell you a short story. A friend of mine, a dentist, was running on the beach of La Jolla. This is a couple of years ago in the early morning. And he noticed this homeless guy. It was obvious for some reason that he was homeless. And he was just awakening under a palm tree at the beach, on a beach in La Jolla, or on a street in La Jolla. And he looked at my friend and he stretched his arms and he said, "Another day in paradise." So our weather is fine. Mm-hmm. The social benefits are extraordinary. And more people are going to come here and live on the streets.
Why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they?
Houston has a no encampment policy. You cannot pitch a tent on the streets, on the sidewalk, on a freeway. They also have housing for every single homeless person. And so they enforce that no encampment provided there's a home for the homeless. Mm-hmm. And there is. And so you don't have the same phenomenon in Houston as you have in LA, in Oakland, and San Francisco. We need to do the same thing. How can a country this affluent have people sleeping on the streets? Mm. When I was a kid, when America was not nearly this rich, you didn't have this phenomenon. This is outrageous. We've allowed this to happen. It's outrageous. And it doesn't help them. As you pointed out, it devalues property values. It's unhygienic. There are diseases. They defecate in the streets. They have to urinate somewhere. It's absolutely outrageous, and we need to stop it. And Gavin Newsom, when he ran for mayor in 2004, I believe, he promised to eradicate the problem in 10 years. That would have been 2014. It was worse. Mm-hmm. Then when he became lieutenant governor, he complained, I have nothing to do as lieutenant governor. Dude, how about fulfilling your campaign promise? This can be solved. It won't happen overnight, but it can be solved. Dr. Ben Carson and I were talking about his plan to deal with the homeless a few days ago. In the waning days of the Trump administration, he negotiated with the Democrat mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti. They had a deal together. The largest landowner in virtually every state, I think every state, is the federal government.
Yeah.
And so he had large parcels of federal government land where they were going to build low-cost housing that would not be subject to the rules and regulations of California, so they could be built at a fraction of the price, that people would get treated, and they'd be moved there. And I asked him, is there a written plan? He goes, oh yeah, send it to me. It's perfectly doable. It won't take place overnight, but over time, this problem can be solved.
Well, Larry, your viewpoints are admirable. I wish you the best in this upcoming election, and I hope that you and your supporters will turn this state around. And if we do, then there's a chance that we can turn this country around. Thank you so much, and parting words.
Parting words, in order for me to win this election, I'm going to need some help. So I want people to go to electelder.com, and throw a little something in the tip jar. Because my opponent, Gavin Newsom, can raise and spend an unlimited amount of money. He's already raised $50 million from the usual suspects: teachers union, public sector unions, Hollywood, big tech. He's going to outspend me by a factor of 9 to 1. I have campaign expenditure limitations. He does not. So I'm going to need some help from people inside California and outside California. So go to electelder.com. Let's try and make this a fair fight, somewhat of a fair fight.
Thank you, Larry, and good luck to you.
Dr. Bob, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.